The opinions expressed in the Brothers on Law show are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for personal professional legal advice.
Thanks for tuning in to Brothers on Law on Go Country 105. I'm Larry Mandel.
And I'm Rob Mandel.
And we've been trial attorneys here in Los Angeles for over 40 years.
On our show, we will discuss current events, talk about legal issues, and have some very entertaining guests stop by. So stay tuned every week for Brothers on Law right here on Go Country 105. All right, here we are on Brothers on Law. I'm Rob Mandel.
And I'm Larry Mandel.
And we're so happy to be back with all of you. Larry, I want to talk to you about something. Now, do you remember that obviously we grew up in a pretty nice area of L.A. and out in the San Fernando Valley. And but do you remember the first time you saw someone who was homeless?
Yeah.
Like living on the street?
I was just driving by and I saw somebody that looked like they didn't belong there. But then I realized that the person didn't really have anywhere to go. They were just aimlessly walking around. The clothes were tattered. And I thought, what is going on? Is this person just...
And how old were you?
I was probably in my 20s.
And that's the first time, really?
Yeah, I think so. And what's going on with this person? Why are they just roaming around? Why are they looking like there's nowhere for them to go?
And so many of these folks have issues. And I think there's been things that have happened in our society now where we don't really care for them. And but we are very lucky to have with us today someone who specializes in mental illness and has her own show, and her name is Dr. Imani Walker.
Yes,
welcome
hi.
to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And you're the star of Married to Medicine in L.A. What's your show all about?
So, Married to Medicine Los Angeles is a series that it's a spinoff of sorts. There's a Married to Medicine in Atlanta that's based out there, the original. This is a spinoff series, so basically it follows the lives of 3 black female doctors and 3 black women who are married to doctors, and basically just explores like what our lives are like, what kind of actually like maybe patient cases we sometimes have to deal with, like just what are the ins and outs of dealing with medicine, being married to medicine as a doctor,
Wow.
or maybe being married to medicine if you're the spouse of a doctor.
Now, Dr. Walker, this show is on...
Bravo. It's on Bravo on Sundays at 9 p.m.
Wow.
And you're a medical doctor.
I'm a medical doctor. I'm a psychiatrist, and I specialize in forensic psychiatry.
And what is that, just for our listeners?
So forensic psychiatry, I mean, as most of your listeners know, psychiatry is the study of mental illnesses and mental disorders. Forensic psychiatry is essentially where psychiatry and the law intersect. So that makes psychiatry a bit different than a lot of other medical specialties, because a lot of times when patients are very mentally ill or very sick, for example, if you have a heart attack, typically speaking, the law doesn't have to get involved. But if you're very mentally ill, if you're very psychotic, that can affect whether you're able to clothe yourself or have a place to live, whether there is, unfortunately, too significant of a percentage of the homeless population that is mentally ill. So the law has to sometimes step in to determine where will this person live? Does this person need help managing his or her funds? Does this person also maybe need help maybe being forced to take medications even though they don't believe they need to take medications? Right. So that's really where I come into play.
And you'll testify on behalf of the patient?
I will testify in most cases on behalf of the hospital. So I work at Gateways Mental Hospital in Echo Park, and I'm the medical director there. So I have my patients, but I also deal with administrative situations in the hospital, but I will go on behalf of the hospital as the treating physician, as the treating psychiatrist, to basically say, this patient's been exhibiting these symptoms. This is the picture of how they were before based upon the chart that we received. This is how the patient's been since they've been here. I believe, based upon these facts, that this person probably, beyond a reasonable doubt, cannot function on their own and needs a conservator to be appointed by the county, or sometimes it's a family member, to basically manage the person's funds. If the person, for example, decides to stop taking their medications, that person can say, hey, you need to go to the hospital, and sign them in. In short, a conservatorship means that the person who's conserved does not have any signatory authority. So you can't just up and buy a car. You can't, get an apartment. It's very drastic, but because these patients are so ill, those are the type of measures that have to be taken just to make sure that they don't end up doing something that could be regrettable later.
And hurt themselves.
Exactly.
And you interview the patient then?
Oh, yeah. So I interview the patients pretty much every day, see how they're doing with their medications, talk to the staff, talk to the family, just to get a good just snapshot of how was this person before and how are they now? Were they ever a fully functional member of society? Did they always kind of behave like what I'm seeing? And with the patients that are conserved, sometimes they were fully, like, I've had patients that were anesthesiologists, doctors who had their own practices and just had a psychotic break or had a manic episode and just devolved and maybe would have been like on the side of the road, like in tatters, like you described. Like I've seen, you wouldn't even believe the types of patients that I've seen. And I chose to work with a specific population because even though they are very complex and sometimes difficult in terms of getting the complete picture, it's very rewarding because at the end they're always really, really grateful, and it's nice to see the transition.
So we have some good outcomes.
Oh, absolutely.
Do we have a story about somebody that started out in a very bad situation that prevailed?
Exactly.
Went beyond that?
Absolutely.
Can you tell us about that?
Sure. It's I had one particular patient, and she actually came from another state, Midwest, came out to California, didn't have any money, she was depressed and was hearing voices. She was depressed and psychotic at the same time. Came out here, started living on Skid Row, where I used to actually work as well. She was doing okay, but then I actually ended up treating her, and I would say maybe 2 to 3 years later, just with consistently taking her medications, she ended up with like 2 jobs. She got herself together, taking care of like her kids, she's a little older, in her 50s, taking care of like her daughter's kids. So she made really just a complete turnaround, and it was a really just beautiful thing to see because, I mean, unfortunately, with the cases that I see, with the patients that I have, they may not get it on the first time. And sometimes it takes some people have been hospitalized up to 100 times.
So I think there's a lack of understanding and oftentimes, unfortunately, a lack of empathy for all these folks that we see on our streets these days.
Absolutely.
And so how, I bet you have some insights as to how this happens to somebody. They could be perhaps a normal person or, functioning in society at one point, and all of a sudden they cascade downward. How does this happen?
A lot of times what I see in terms of people but actually passing judgment on other people is because you'll be in your car, you're in a comfortable situation, like you got air conditioning, you got leather seats, you're driving around, and you see somebody like, oh, well, that person clearly doesn't do what I do, and therefore they deserve to be where they're at.
Right.
But in a lot of times, especially with patients that I see that have co-occurring like substance abuse issues, they were just attempting to self-medicate.
Right.
So there's a stigma surrounding mental illness, as we all know. And a lot of times patients or people don't want to go get the help. So they're like, well, you know what? I have anxiety. I'm going to go buy some Xanax off the street. That type of medication, for example, can be very addictive if you take too much of it and you build up a tolerance. And then you move, oh, this isn't working, let me add alcohol. Then you end up maybe with an alcohol problem. So a lot of times, I haven't ever encountered someone who woke up and was like, you know what, I really want to be a heroin addict today.
Right.
It's mostly like, I got into a car accident, and we're aware, like you all are lawyers, we're aware of a lot of the judgments that have come out now against the pharmaceutical companies because they were pushing these drugs, and they were creating situations where
Prozac.
doctors were
Opioids.
pushing opiates,
Yeah.
And we didn't know, the public didn't know, the doctors didn't necessarily always know how addictive those were. So you have a patient, I got into a car accident. It wasn't their fault. They go to the doctor's giving them all these opiates, and then after the 3-month mark, it's like, well, that's too much.
The doctor cuts them off.
Right. And then they're like, what am I supposed to do? Do I buy OxyContin off the street? They can try that. But then it's like, well, heroin lasts longer and it's cheaper. And now you're in that type of a situation.
And Doc,
So
I
can
had
we-
that same incident or that same circumstance where our office represented a person who wasn't homeless, became homeless, and had finished all his prescription drugs and was still in pain, and then went to heroin. And it was quite devastating to deal with. And I saw the decline. And I wish he had somebody like you to interact with.
Have you suffered or been injured by someone else's negligence? When you need a legal team that will stand up for what is right, won't give up the fight and obtain justice, call 818-886-6600. Mandel Trial Lawyers specializes in personal injury cases of all types. Whether it's a car accident, product or premises liability, dog bite, or a catastrophic injury, Mandel Trial Lawyers are there for you when the fight is worth it. Call now for your free consultation. 818-886-6600. Let the scales of justice tip in your favor.
Is that how most of the folks we see that are mentally ill on our streets today become in that situation, is from some kind of addiction or substance abuse?
I wouldn't say most, but I would say a good 40%. I think that with the other, let's say 50 to 60%, what you're really dealing with, maybe that person, I encounter a lot of people who they just lost their job. Maybe they didn't finish high school. Maybe they did. Maybe they were working minimum wage and they got hurt, or they had to take care of a family member, and they were the only one who may have had the job, not the greatest job, but now they feel that they have to sacrifice a bit of themselves to help someone else, but now it becomes they have to sacrifice all of themselves.
So it's an economic homelessness.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, I would say economic more so than anything, and then the rest of it has to deal with mental illness.
So what do we do on a societal level do you have any ideas on what we can do? I mean, it's kind of a general thought.
It is, but I mean, I've thought about
The cure for homelessness, is that what you're asking Dr. Imani here?
I have thought of it a
Mm-hmm.
lot, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, we do live in probably the richest country in the world, but we have a lot of debt to China. Like, we have to take a look at ourselves and understand that probably we're not budgeting as a country very well. Politically. Right. So there's that. Then that trickles down onto federal and state levels. Mental health funding is always the first that's cut. Like, it's always cut first. And when that happens, now you have to deal with we're like, as psychiatrists, especially because I work on the administrative side, there's always a scramble to like, where's the money going to come from? Where's the money going to come from? And it works itself out, but why does it have to be that way? So as far as the mental health component of homelessness, I'm a firm believer. Actually, Trump said this, and I couldn't believe I agreed with it. We really do need to bring asylums back.
What do you know?
Well, isn't that one of the triggering events that some of the scholars trace homeless back to?
Absolutely.
Is that there was a series of budget cuts
in the 80s with Reagan. Yeah,
right.
Reagan cut the budgets for the asylums. For a lot of the patients that I see, let me back up. For some of the patients that I see that end up being placed on a conservatorship, they're not going to work.
Right.
They're not.
They're not capable.
It's not going to happen.
Right.
Like, I wish it could happen, but then I also wish I had wings and could fly away. Like,
Sure.
it's just not going to happen.
And where do they go? Okay, so they have a conservatorship.
They go on the streets.
They're back on the street?
Well, a lot of times they will rotate. So they'll go from, I'm making this up, they'll go from being homeless to a hospital. I'll treat them. They'll be placed on conservatorship. They'll go to a long-term care facility where they can stay for, anywhere from 6 months to maybe like 3 years max. Then they'll go to a boarding care, but then they may stop taking their medications out of boarding care because that's a lower level of care. So anything that's not the hospital is a lower level of care. Once you start to put more of the responsibility into their hands, some of these as many medications and as safe as I try to do it, they're always going to hear voices.
Yeah.
And they get used to it. But if they don't take that one particular medication for like 2 days, they're right back to square one. So asylums actually provide a safe place, a daily program, if you will, like, oh, it's 8 o'clock, we're going to get up. Because just consider the patients that I see in the hospital, we have to say to them, like, did you take a bath today? Did you eat breakfast? Did you...
And they may not even know.
They don't know.
Yeah.
Those are not patients. Those are not people that are going to like, oh, I'm going to go work at Chipotle. And you wouldn't want them working at Chipotle. I love them to death, but it's not going to happen.
Yeah, they're beyond that.
They're beyond that.
Stay connected with us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and of course, brothersonlaw.com.
I kind of picture One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Right.
A little
No,
bit.
that's
yeah,
it.
with Nurse Ratched at the helm.
Right.
That could be bad.
Yeah, that
asylum,
could be
yeah.
bad. But I mean, no, now that was actually a psychiatric hospital unit,
Oh,
so
okay.
that's different. But an asylum, there used to be an asylum. I don't know if it was on the West LA VA campus, but it was close by. But they had they had like a garden for them, and they would they had activities all day. Like those are the types this is really what we need.
Yeah.
Like I'm a very big proponent of can we please bring asylums back?
Yeah.
Because guaranteed Twin Towers, which has actually one of the highest numbers of psychiatric people, let's say, in the country, now they're actually building, they got funding approved to actually build a separate psychiatric jail.
Downtown.
Yeah, downtown.
Yeah. Psychiatric jails we don't need.
Well,
Or do we?
I mean, I think that we do, but at the same time, once let's say someone's so psychotic that they committed a crime and they need to be treated, they need to do their time. But they also need to be treated. I used to work at Twin Towers. We did really great work there. But once they're released, where are they going to go? Sometimes the Twin Towers will just call us and be like, can you take this patient? I'm like, but that's not this person isn't sick enough to come to an acute psychiatric hospital. That's not fair to the patient.
Yeah.
So in those cases, you need to go to an asylum. Go hang out with your other friends, go tend to the garden, go to your groups every day and kick back,
Right.
have fun.
Because aren't we paying, as a society, we're paying the cost on the back end of this problem, and it's a higher cost, is it not?
It is. We are.
Yeah.
So every time, guaranteed, if we had asylums open the way that we used to, the homeless population would drop overnight. Jails would not have to necessarily have as many psychiatrists in there because now there's some place for them to go to. But and like I was saying with the patients that I typically treat, sometimes we just have to discharge them to shelters. It's their right. The state of California says if a shelter is actually a viable place to stay.
But the shelters aren't schooled in treating these type of patients or
no,
occupants.
they're not. When I used to work on Skid Row, on San Pedro and Fifth, the mission was across the street from the clinic, so it was nice. And there was also another psychiatric clinic around the corner, so that was nice. But at the same time, That's not appropriate. I had patients say, oh, well, I stay in a shelter and it's hard for me to sleep at night because someone next to me is talking to themselves because they hear voices because they're hallucinating. That's not appropriate. Like, a shelter is a short term. Right. And a lot of times you have patients that are there for longer, but you also have patients that just are not being like looked after. And that's really where I kind of come in, and I've been trying to advocate, like, we need asylums. Really
so how do
badly.
we get there? And also, where is it going to be? Because I think it's a natural
the
fear.
NIMBY effect.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
Don't have them near me. But didn't we have Camarillo? Was Camarillo an asylum?
Camarillo was a state hospital. I know that it closed down a while ago. Some of my older patients said that they've been there. I don't remember if it was an asylum or not, because that was too far ago for me. But where would they be? I mean, they could be. I guaranteed there are asylum buildings that are still intact. They just need to be built up.
Yeah. Well, Camarillo's still there.
Camarillo's definitely still there.
It's a state college now instead of a state hospital.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they could be. I mean, they could really logistically be anywhere. I know that a lot of times. I read the news recently, and people are really concerned about a homeless shelter being built in their neighborhood.
Right.
But I'm like, yeah, or you could have those people, hanging out on your corner.
That's true.
So
playing through your trash.
Right. And those places provide services. They provide, health services. They provide social work services. Like, you really do want that just there, even if it's down the street. And quite honestly, unfortunately, people still really do have a very bad perception of people who are homeless or mentally ill. I can say from experience, they are some of the most sweetest, grateful people I've ever met, and that's why I choose to work with them.
We're Larry and Rob Mandel, the brothers-in-law, here on Go Country 105. Do you have a legal issue you need help with? We want to hear from you.
Find us on Instagram and send us a message. Then tune in on Saturdays at 8 a.m. right here on Go Country 105.
It's so heartbreaking to see that situation. And so when I talk to my colleagues about it, what can we do to, just to have people where they have some kind of, basic needs taken care of than living in a tent?
I occasionally will take like a old bag that I have and just fill it with just things that I know they need. Socks are very important because they walk a lot. Underwear is really important for women, sanitary supplies like tampons, pads. Some women, especially if they have children, will forego getting what they need to get diapers for their kids. Wow. And that's not exactly sanitary, or just, it's just a really bad feeling to know that you're just a mess and you're able to take care of your kid. It's just very dehumanizing, and it's already dehumanizing enough to be homeless. So on a micro level, I think that we really need to just accept the fact that, look, these people are here. You passing judgment and scowling at them, walking by or ignoring them in your car, that's not going to help the situation. So I think on a micro level, we could do that. And no one's saying that you have to have a long conversation. Just like here, I thought that you could use this.
That's sweet.
Yeah. On a macro level, though, I think that societally, we really need to pressure, politicians. And just like how there was a lot of change a couple of years ago in terms of senators who ran and some people got, ousted. I just think that we really need to pressure politicians. We need asylums. We really need the mental health funding.
We do. The other thing that you're involved in is testifying in cases involving the criminally insane. Can you just talk about that for a moment, and then we'll move on to a couple of segments that we do on the show?
Sure. I deal with homeless, indigent population a lot of times when they come to Gateways Mental Hospital, where I work. They are on 72-hour holds. In the California Penal Code, it's 5150.
That's right.
So that's what that stands for. So the Van Halen album.
Right.
And then after those 72 hours are up, if a psychiatrist such as myself feels that they require more treatment because they're gravely disabled, meaning they cannot provide food, clothing, or shelter for themselves, or they're a danger to themselves or to others, then a 5250 or an additional 14 days can be authorized. Then after that, there's a 30-day hold. And then after that, we can determine whether they may need to be conserved or not. I also deal with patients who, as a result of their crime, were found to be mentally incompetent to stand trial. And those patients oftentimes will go to a state mental hospital. Once they have completed their program and been found to understand the judicial process, because they have to keep going to court, then they get released to what are called conditional release programs or CONREP programs. Some of those patients are because the crimes they committed were very scary and very serious.
So what would be the most egregious or horrifying thing you've seen in this kind of setting?
There was a patient of mine who was married to a man, I want to say maybe for 25, 30 years, but he was very abusive to her. And one day he decided he was going to get drunk and he was going to try to sexually assault her. And she shot him dead.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now,
and she was thought to be insane?
I was like, this woman's my hero.
Yeah.
I was like, this is great. But she was depressed and psychotic at the time.
I see.
And so she had to go to a state mental hospital. Super sweet lady. But when really tiny, petite lady, so sweet. But she was just like, enough is enough. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. As far as things that are more egregious, I had a patient, very, very nice man, who basically decapitated his father because the voices told him to.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but really sweet.
Crazy.
But that's after years and years of treatment and medications. And those patients have an incentive to have to take the medications to get better, because if not, they'll be in the mental hospital for a long time.
Yeah. Now, can someone who's done a horrible crime like that be released after they take the medication?
Yes.
And they go, oh wow,
they can. They actually can. And honestly, some of those people, like, you may not even, like, you would not know, but they are so aware that what they did was wrong. And when you meet them now and we read what they actually did, it's so obvious that they were really sick at the time of the crime.
Well, it's so interesting. I could talk to Dr. Walker all day long. This is great. So we have a message in the Mandel message box.
Now it's time to check the Mandel message box.
Noreen emailed us. I live in a nice neighborhood. I live across the street from the ugliest house on the block. The landscape is full of weeds, etc. All the neighbors are fed up. And someone told us we can call the police for what's called a welfare check. But how can I get them to spruce up their place to a presentable status? What if one of us wants to sell our properties? This is a big issue for us and our neighbors. Dr. Walker, what do you think? Can the police be called for a welfare check because someone's house is deteriorating and it's like the eyesore of the block?
Well, there's two ways I can answer that. The first is to say, anyone can call for a wellness check. It really depends upon whether the police will deem that they should go out there.
Right.
Having a house in disrepair isn't necessarily enough, but if, for example, someone went and knocked on the door, and let's say it may be a hoarding situation, or the person who answers the door appears very malnourished, then that would be, concern for a welfare check. If they're, animals and, and not looking well, that would be cause for a wellness check. As I was saying before, grave disability is someone's inability to provide food, clothing, or shelter for themselves. In this case, the person does have shelter. It's just an eyesore. Yeah. So that's, aesthetically, that's not really legally it's not holdable.
Probably not enough.
That's not enough.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we do want to thank you, Imani Walker, for coming down here.
Yes.
Can you tell our audience how they would get a hold of you, or how does someone reach you if they feel that they need a psychiatrist like yourself?
Sure. So I can be reached primarily through my website. So my name is Dr. Imani Walker. My website is Dr.-Imani, and so it's spelled out. So it's DOCTOR-IMANI. ani.com. And if you go to the services section, you can email me and I'll get right back to you.
Perfect. And you're on Bravo every Sunday?
Yes, every Sunday, Bravo Network, 9 p.m. on Married to Medicine, Los Angeles.
Beautiful.
Excellent. That's great. Rob, I think it's time to wrap it up.
Yes, it is.
We want to thank you for tuning in and catch us next week right here on Go Country 105. And just remember, let the scales of justice tip in your favor.
The opinions expressed in the Brothers on Law show are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for personal professional legal advice.